Hey guys, welcome to another Midweek. 2021 is here, it's amongst us, and 2020 is now gone. It's the back door, talk to the hand, we are done with you. And I am so happy about that because that has just been a rough year for all of us. And so now that we're in 2021, I know last week we talked a little bit about resolutions and what that may look like for you. And so if you're on a journey to lose weight, you're on a journey to get financially stable, maybe to do different spending habits or to just try to build better habits and get rid of some nasty ones, or maybe you're on a journey to just get spiritually sound. You just want to get closer to God. And so whatever that looks like for you, whatever journey you're on right now, I just want to tell you, keep going, because everything that's worth something is worth fighting for. And that's you. You're worth it. All right. So if you've got to wake up every morning and remind yourself that you're worth it, do it, because it is worth the fight. And anything that is good is worth fighting for. And so that's why Paul says, man, keep up the good fight. Keep doing everything you're doing and keep pursuing the truth that you know, which is Jesus Christ and the things that he has set before you, the convictions that he's laying on your heart to make you a better person, to just be better in the world. Let's try to accomplish that together. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you tonight about a conviction that I've had, especially as the new year goes on. We have all these plans and we get all these things in our mind that we want to try to accomplish, but very rarely is one of those things forgiveness. And I feel like sometimes you and I, we have to talk about this. We have to be reminded of what forgiveness looks like, about what forgiveness is in our life. And that's why today we're going to talk about Matthew 18. See, Jesus just gets done telling them and talking to them about what this idea of forgiveness looks like. He says, hey, if you've got a problem with your brother, you need to go privately and you need to address that. So what does that look like for you? I mean, you may be thinking right now, if I were to ask you, is there anyone in your life that you have an issue with? Maybe it's a bitterness that you carry, that you've carried for years. Maybe it's an issue that's happened years ago and you just can't seem to let this go. Or every time this person shows up, it just boils your blood and you just can't have a peace of mind knowing that they're even in the same room with you. There may have been a name that just popped in your head. That's who I'm talking about. And so Jesus says, if you have an issue with them, you need to go and you need to deal with that. In fact, he's so serious about it that on the Sermon on the Mount, right, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, Jesus says that right here, right now, if you're sitting here listening to me preach to you, and yet you have bitterness or hatred towards your brother, you need to leave here and you need to go deal with that before you come and have your heart full of worship. That's how serious Jesus feels about this attitude of forgiveness. He says, go and deal with your problem. And so maybe for what that looks like for you and I is we've got to go and we've got to start talking about these things, right? And what stops us for the most part is the fact that we get afraid of how the conversation is going to go. We're afraid that if they don't agree with me, then maybe they're going to think I hate them, or maybe if they get loud, I have to get louder, and that's how we start yelling, and it's just never good for anybody. But there is such a thing as a healthy dialogue, a healthy conflict. And so I challenge you to do those. But then he goes on to say that if you can't do that, if you try to go and make peace and it just isn't working, go and find 2 or 3 other brothers or sisters and go to that person together in a little small group and just try to deal with that together. Let them help kind of mitigate the conversation so that if your blood starts to get boiling, if you start to get angry, that you have people kind of, hey, Brandon, calm down. And then they try to explain to whoever the other person is, this is what we hear him saying. Do you hear the issue that is coming? Yeah, he's loud. Yeah, he's angry right now. But do you hear beyond the anger what the root of the problem is? And then Jesus says, and if they still won't listen, even after you bring 2 or 3 friends to try to resolve the issue, then take it to the church, right? Take that to the church. Now, I've never had to personally go that far in my conflicts. And I hope that you never have to either, because I worry that could be a big issue. So hopefully we can resolve these in the first 2 steps. But then Peter, I love what Peter does, because just immediately after Jesus is talking about this, Peter says, well, how often do I need to forgive people? And that's the question I want to ask you tonight, right? Because you may have been dealing with this battle for a long time. You may be harboring bitterness that is just robbing you of your joy. And so as the new year comes and you want to have all these things that are happening in your life and you want to better your life, you just feel like you're stuck because that bitterness is just staying right there. That bitterness is just hanging on to you and it's eating at your soul and it's just putting a poison throughout your body. And as much as you're trying to do everything on the outside to look better, to feel better, to spiritually get better, you just can't, because on the inside, that poison is just corroding your entire life. and that's bitterness. And we've talked about that a long time ago when we went through the book of Colossians together. And so Peter just speaks up and he says, well, how often do I have to forgive them? You know, Peter's one of those guys, he puts his foot in his mouth a lot. And I imagine Jesus saying, you know what, Pete, I'm glad you asked that question. And then he goes on to tell this parable of how a king had a servant come forward. Now, this servant owed the king a lot of money. We're talking lifetimes worth of money that he owed in debt to this king. And he came forward expecting the king to be angry because he'd be justified in doing so, expecting the king to hold it against him. And so he's put down on his knees before the king. This is how I visualize it. And his head is bent down and he is forced to be humbled before the king. And the king says, now, wait a minute. Now, this is me paraphrasing. So if you're reading Matthew 18, it's going to look a little different, but this is me paraphrasing this story. And so the king looks at the Senate and says, guys, let him go. Make him stand up. And so they put the guy on his feet, right? And the king's looking at him as an equal, not as somebody who's superior to him, not as an authority. He's looking at him eyeball to eyeball, man to man. He says, get him on his feet. And he looks at the king and he says, listen, I know that you owe me a lot. In fact, I know it's a lifetime's worth and you're never, ever going to be able to repay that. But I don't want you to carry that with you for the rest of your life. I don't want you to feel like you have to walk on eggshells around me because you can't afford to pay back what I've given to you. So I just want to rest your soul. I want to give you a little peace of mind by letting you know that debt has been forgiven. You don't owe me a thing. Now imagine if that's you, right? Imagine if that's you, you owe this tremendous amount of debt, and all of a sudden your debt collector comes to you and says, hey, guess what? The debt's been paid. You don't owe anything. I mean, you would walk out probably doing backflips if you could, cartwheels, and just being super excited that a debt that you would never, ever be able to pay back has been paid in full and that you are free to go. I mean, that would alleviate a lot of stress and take off a lot of weight from my shoulders. I know it would. Right? And so what happens next is this servant who has just been forgiven of this huge debt goes out and sees another person who owes him some money. Right? And he says, now wait a minute. He goes, come here. And the guy comes over and he looks at him and says, listen, man, I let you borrow that money. You know, we're talking, maybe $1,000 or so. Something that's easily paid back. Hey, you owe me this money, man. Where's my money? And the guy's like, hey, I'm doing everything I can, man. The fish aren't biting. I'm not being able to catch. I can't sell it in the market. Money's tight. I got the kids' school programs. I got all this stuff going on. You're like, listen, I don't care about any of that stuff. Your problems are your problems, man. It's not my fault that you can't manage your money well. It's not my fault that you had 6 kids. It's not my fault that your world is crumbling around. What I need is my money, right? That's what I need is my money. And so I'm going to need you to pay that back. And if you don't, I'm going to the authorities and I'm going to get you put in jail. He goes, I don't have anything on me. Like, I literally am doing the best I can. I don't have anything. And you're like, all right, guards. And they come over and they hear the disturbance and they arrest this man. And then they take him before the king. And they try to justify their case. And he says, this man owes me money. And then the king looks at you and he remembers, hey, weren't you the guy that owed me a lifetime's worth, beyond a lifetime's worth of pay? And I forgave you? So what right do you have to go over to this man who owes you just a little bit and hold it against him like that? You have just been forgiven a tremendous debt, and yet you're going to go after this guy. And Jesus at that moment is teaching Peter and his disciples a huge lesson. He says, you don't forgive 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. And that is just basically a saying of like, listen, as often as forgiveness is offered, give it. Even when it's not asked for, give it. And Jesus taught this beautiful lesson on what forgiveness looks like, because I think so often in our life, the people we have the hardest time forgiving are the things that we need forgiveness for ourselves. Do you realize that the people that you dislike the most in life are probably the ones who act like you the most? And you start to get so upset with yourself, and that bitterness creeps in about yourself because you hate that about yourself, that anyone who carries that attribute you look at with hatred. And Jesus says the work has to be done in here, in your heart. Forgiveness has to take place here before you move out there. And when it happens, it becomes a beautiful thing. Imagine if you made forgiveness a priority this year. And you may be somebody who's like, I don't have any enemies right now. Well, and that's great. I'm glad that you don't. But for the most of us, we probably do. And maybe for 2021, I want to challenge you to make forgiveness a priority. to make loving people a priority, to show forgiveness in everything. Because if you don't wrong people, chances are people are probably going to wrong you. And having an attitude of forgiveness is going to cultivate an environment to where when they look at you, they're going to say, wow, this person is so gracious, so generous, and they love unconditionally. And that's going to teach a lesson about Jesus more than anything else could. And so, friends, I hope you're doing well in 2021. I hope you started off real strong. I hope you're staying true to the commitments you're trying to make to yourself. But I just ask that you add this one more to it, that you try to be forgiving, that you learn to love from your heart, right? That you learn to forgive, because ultimately Jesus paid for a debt that you and I could never pay. He took the price that you and I deserve, and he conquered the death that you and I deserve, a debt that we would never be able to pay back. So for me, my hope is that I can start to forgive those who owe me a little bit, who owe me an apology, who owe me money, who owe me time that they've taken from my life, who've robbed me of my joy, that I can say, you know what, man, I forgive you because I have been forgiven. Friends, we hope that you have a good week, and we look forward to seeing you next time.